Welcome to the Belly Button Window channel and episode 32 of the Jimi Hendrix story, like you've never heard it before. In this episode, we do a deep dive into March of 1969, day by day and in detail. Please remember to check the channel's community tab and video information page, where you will find links to related videos, performances and stunning photographs from the period. March arrived, and Jimmy was due back in America. He asked me to go with him, and I agreed, conveniently forgetting just how much I hated it the last time. But I could have had no idea how much worse it would be this time around. I wished I had followed my instincts and stayed at home. Jimmy told me that every time he left his hotel in New York, it was like stepping onto a roller coaster, recalled Kathy Etchingham. While Noel Redding observed, the renewed PPX quagmire slowly killed Jimmy's creative drive, and therefore the experience, by sucking him into endless hours of legal bickering, including one meeting attended by 32 lawyers. No wonder he couldn't concentrate. The angry whirlpool of business was something I had never imagined, even in my worst nightmares. The meetings were so complex, I never knew where I stood. Well, the show must go on, as the saying goes, and so March 1969 sees Jimmy doing further press, building on the more than 24 interviews already done in the first 2 months of the year, usually from his Mayfair flat, since Jeffrey and Chandler had closed their London office. While mid-March sees the group return to New York for recording and preparation before their forthcoming April US tour. Hendrix author Charles Cross recounts, on one of his off days, Jimmy made an unusual home recording in his Brook Street flat, a 3-minute spoken-word version of Room Full of Mirrors. On the track, Jimmy unleashed an inner monologue about demons, gods, and lost little boys. Call out your loved ones. You better call a little louder because you will be lost very soon. You'll be lost within yourself, past dimensional stage, you'll be lost in vacuums. I turn to the world. What has the world to offer me except pats on the back? One line shouted, sounded like Jimmy was possessed. Tell this idiot to get the hell out of me and get me out of this damned mirrored room. Cross goes on to speculate that music had once offered Jimmy a way to imagine a life different from the grueling circumstances of his youth. Though his musical gift had indeed given him success, it had not proved to be the panacea he had expected. Like his Room Full of Mirrors spoken-word performance, Jimmy's career was now something he wanted to escape. It was no longer the fairy tale dream that he had sought for so many years. Monday, the 3rd of March. At Jimmy's Mayfair flat, an interview and photo shoot is arranged with a photographer and Caroline Coon of Oz magazine. However, the session is aborted almost as soon as it begins. Sometime later, Mitch Mitchell is also interviewed by Coon and published in Oz magazine, the 19th of March 1969. Oz magazine was an independently published, alternative or underground publication associated with the international counterculture of the 1960s and famous for challenging establishment sensibilities and pioneering coverage around contentious issues such as censorship, homosexuality, police brutality, and the Vietnam War. Kathy Etchingham recalled the situation. A girl called Caroline Coon arranged to come and interview Jimmy for some magazine. When she arrived at the flat, she had 2 other people with her, one of them a photographer. After I'd let them in, she asked if there was somewhere where she could get changed. She took a bag of clothes up to the bathroom and must have laid them out before coming down to talk to Jimmy. They chatted for a bit, making good-natured fun of the fact that her name was Coon. Then she said, "I'd like to have some photographs taken with you. Do you mind if I get changed?" "Changed into what?" Jimmy asked. "Oh, I've got this black underwear that I want to wear," she said. Jimmy immediately lost his temper and told her to get out of the flat. She insulted him back and he went through the roof, shouting abuse at her. The voices were so loud, I could hear them through the floorboards, even though I had disappeared upstairs. I wasn't surprised. If Jimmy ever thought he was being insulted or asked to pose, as if he were some kind of clown, his wrath was terrible indeed. She goes on to say that Jimmy quite enjoyed being interviewed and filmed, although he tended to waffle on a lot and put his hand in front of his mouth and giggle rather girlishly. It was hard for him to think of anything deep and meaningful to say to blokes in suits with microphones, but he was always willing to do his best. He didn't go in for preening before photo sessions, but he would worry if he had spots on his face. In the end, his hair started giving him trouble too. He'd had it straightened so many times to get the effect he wanted that the ends started to break off. He began letting it stay more natural, giving up on the rollers, just putting a bandana around his head and wearing a hat instead. It still looked pretty wild. Tuesday, the 4th of March. Jimmy is interviewed by Jane de Mendelssohn for the publication, International Times, published on the 28th of March 1969. Jane de Mendelssohn, whose husband Felix had once been editor of Britain's most famous underground newspaper, International Times, was sent by the paper to interview Jimmy. She wrote, "I think at the beginning I was quite overawed by him. I was very surprised that, when I got to his flat in Mayfair, he opened the door in the nude. I followed his naked torso up the stairs to the first floor. As soon as he got into the room, he got into bed. Quite a strange way to start an interview with a famous pop star, or anyone else come to that. Most of the interview was conducted with Jimmy in bed, and me sitting on the side of the bed, and on his bedside table was the biggest collection of alcohol and drugs. He was constantly smoking joints, and we were both drinking. I had much less than he did, because I wanted to keep the interview together, but I also wanted to get to some level where I could communicate with him. I remember we finished off the interview in the early evening, but we hadn't finished, so he invited me back the next day and we started the whole thing all over again. The reason I did interviews at all was that I'm interested in what makes people tick. I came away feeling I'd met somebody." Hendrix author Charles Cross described the interview this way. When Mendelssohn asked Jimmy about an interview in which he'd suggested it was time for a change from the pretty songs of the Beatles, he gave a discourse on the British press, which also suggested how the media were complicit in creating his wild man persona. "Which paper was that in?" Jimmy asked. "Sunday Mirror." "Well, most of those papers are all screwed up anyway. They come over here and they do their interviews. We turn the cats on, you know, give them wine and all that, and they go back and they're so stoned they don't know what they are writing about." He then hinted at his own true biography. "If I wasn't a guitar player, I would probably be in jail." To the question of what motivated his songs, he replied, "Well, honest-to-God truth, on the first LP I didn't know what I was writing about. Most of the songs like Purple Haze and Wind Cries Mary were about 10 pages long, but then were restricted to a certain time limit, so I had to break them all down. So once I'd broken the songs down, I didn't know whether they were going to be understood or not. Maybe some of the meanings got lost by breaking them down, which I never do anymore." He complained about his schedule. "I've had no time off to myself since I've been in this scene. Most people would like to retire and just disappear from the scene, which I'd love to do, but then there's still things I'd like to say. I wish it wasn't so important to me. I wish I could just turn my mind off." The very traits that had made Jimmy a star, ambition and talent, made it impossible for him to step back from his career and have a life off stage. In most interviews, Jimmy was asked about the political and social movements of the day, drugs, Black Power, and the Vietnam War. Jimmy usually sidestepped these questions, though he did tell Mendelssohn, "There's certain people on this earth that have the power to do different things. For instance, in the Black Power movement, they're using it wrongly. Protest is over with. It's the solutions everyone wants now, not just protest." Wednesday, the 5th of March. Jane Mendelssohn continues her interview, and also on the same day at his Mayfair apartment, Valerie Mabs interviews Hendrix for Record Mirror, published March 15, 1969. Thursday, the 6th of March. And Jimmy is interviewed this time by John Grant of New Musical Express, published March 15, 1969. That evening, Jimi Hendrix goes to the Ronnie Scott's Club to see Roland KIRK and his quartet perform. Then later Jimmy joins Billy Preston at the Speakeasy Club, where he participates in a jam session. Friday the 7th of March. At Olympic Studios in London, Hendrix stops by to see Noel Redding, who is recording with his group, Fat Mattress. Over the next 4 or 5 days, Jimmy jams, on more than one occasion with saxophonist Roland KIRK, both at Ronnie Scott's Club, and also one evening back at Jimmy's flat. Monday the 10th of March. At London's Speakeasy Club, Jimmy jams with members of the group The Gods. Wednesday the 12th of March. Jimmy gives an interview to Alan Smith of New Musical Express at his Mayfair apartment, while The Experience is interviewed by Ray Coleman for the Disc and Music Echo newspaper, published March 22, 1969. Thursday the 13th of March. Jimmy and Mitch fly from London's Heathrow Airport to JFK Airport, New York, and Noel follows a week later. While in New York, the group stayed at the Pierre Hotel. Kathy Etchingham recalled, I flew out a few days after Jimmy. We were booked into the garden suite of the Pierre Hotel, a fancy place on East 61st Street at the corner of Central Park. And when I arrived, there was a huge limousine with darkened windows waiting for me at the airport. It was from a company called Head Limousines. The driver was sucking on a joint and passing it over his shoulder to me as we drove down into Manhattan. In the Big Apple, the rock and roll dream had become a constant reality. If you chose to, you could avoid real life altogether. She goes on to say, I was just dozing off when Jimmy arrived back, trailing an enormous entourage like the colorful leader of some circus freak show. From that moment on, there never seemed to be less than 20 people hanging out around us. If we went out to eat, they all came too, at Jimmy's expense. They were the loudest, nastiest bunch I had ever come across. Many of the women were obviously whores, and men appeared to be pimps and drug dealers, with their cool shades and little spoons hanging around their necks, like badges of office. I was startled by how relaxed Jimmy seemed among them all, a king presiding over a court of fools. If I tried asking him to send them all away, he would become defensive. These people are my friends, he would say. While Noel noted that we warmed up for the US tour, with photo sessions and recording sessions at New York's record plant, scheduled from midnight to 8 in the morning. Compared to the low output of the Electric Ladyland sessions, even getting one track done in 8 hours seemed a major advance. What Noel doesn't mention is that the record plant had recently acquired new Ampex 16-track recording machines for their studios. State-of-the-art doesn't come cheap though, at $160 an hour, and with tape being $150 a roll, costs could frequently run as high as $2,500 a night, or $20,000 in today's dollars. Friday, the 14th of March. Jimmy sends a letter to Ursula Uschi Obermaier, whom he met in Berlin back in January. Uschi is a former fashion model and actress associated with the 1968 left-wing movement in Germany. She is considered an iconic sex symbol of the so-called 1968 generation and the protests of 1968, and who was also featured on the cover of Playboy. The letter is as follows. Dearest Uschi, I hope you still remember of me. How are you doing? Good, I hope. I heard you were in England not too long ago. I heard about strange things happening in Berlin. Maybe I really was thinking I should send for you if you want to come see me. I don't know how you feel about me. I also know that I promised to stay in touch with you, but I didn't. Uschi, I have been working very hard on my new songs lately, but the main reason I write a lot is because I've been thinking about you since the last time I saw you. You really made me happy then. I didn't think about too many problems when I was with you. I never go anywhere or talk to a lot of people again. Like I said, I worked really hard. But the thought of you is very fresh in my mind, and maybe in my heart. It is very difficult for me to trust even my own feelings. I always hurt myself. But then, I feel something about you that is very real. I just want to know what it is. I really want to see you again. I can call you soon. I hope you will be there. We have to record in New York for a while, maybe 2 weeks. I wish I could talk to your friends at your house more, but I didn't know what to say. I love them. I hope to see them again. I have to go now. Please write to me at this address. Kisses to you. I have to go now. Your Jimmy. Jimmy's letter was never answered. Sometime between March 13th and March 28th, while in New York, Paul Zimmerman interviews Jimmy for Newsweek magazine, later published May 26, 1969. Saturday, the 15th of March. At Mercury Studios in New York, Hendrix participates in a recorded jam session with the Buddy Miles Express, referred to as the Blue Window Jam. Then, Sunday, the 16th of March, recording sessions for the Star-Spangled Banner and Hey Gypsy Boy at New York's Record Plant Studios. It should be noted that this represents the first time Jimmy has recorded with 16-track technology. Tuesday, the 18th of March, early morning jam at Small's Paradise, a Harlem jazz club with Lonnie Youngblood and his backing band, the Blood Brothers, featuring the numbers Let Me Move You, Come On, Let the Good Times Roll, and Georgia Blues, with Lonnie Youngblood doing vocals. Then back to the record plant, working on Star-Spangled Banner, Hey Gypsy Boy, and various jams. It is believed that Hendrix recorded the Star-Spangled Banner solo without Mitch and Noel in the studio with him, and that he was then joined by Buddy Miles and an unknown organist for the Gypsy Boy, an embryonic version of Hey Baby, Land of the New Rising Sun. According to Jimmy Mays, drummer for the Blood Brothers, Jimmy buys a new black Gibson Flying V guitar on this day. Wednesday, the 19th of March, sees the repeat of the previous day, with Jimmy returning to Small's Paradise to see Lonnie Youngblood and the Blood Brothers, followed by the record plant. Saturday the 22nd of March, Billboard International Magazine awards Hendrix the title Artist of the Year in their Popular Music Prize for 1969. Tuesday the 25th of March, at the record plant, Jimmy participates in a jam session known as the Jimmy-Jimmy Jam, featuring John McLaughlin on guitar, Jim McCarty on guitar, Dave Holland on bass, and Buddy Miles on drums. Stephen Roby, in his book Black Gold, The Lost Archives of Jimi Hendrix, explains, in 1969, guitarist John McLaughlin, who had just signed with Alan Douglas, began working at the record plant on the album Devotion. Joining McLaughlin on the album were Buddy Miles on drums and Larry Young on keyboards. While this album was being recorded in the record plant's lower level, Hendrix worked in the studio upstairs. On one fortunate occasion, the two guitarists met. A few days after his arrival in the US, McLaughlin recorded with Miles Davis for his 1969 album In a Silent Way. He later jammed with Hendrix at New York's record plant, where Hendrix was playing with Buddy Miles, bassist Roland Robinson, and guitarist Jim McCarty of BM Express. At the request of Mitch Mitchell, McLaughlin went to the record plant with the intention of jamming with Hendrix, not recording. In 1996, Roby interviewed McLaughlin and asked him how the jam with Hendrix took place. McLaughlin explains, "It was through Mitch Mitchell. Mitch and I go back to working with Georgie Fame in the early 60s. In 1969, I was playing with Tony Williams. Mitch was a big fan of his and would come to see us play at the Vanguard. One night, Mitch invited us to the record plant. I came down with Larry Young and Dave Holland, MD's bassist, 68 to 70. Basically, we played, but it was difficult because at the time, I was using a hollow-bodied acoustic, like a country guitar. The volume on it was so low and Buddy Miles was playing drums so loud. Dave Holland was there and Jimmy played electric. It wasn't really a playing session, it was just hanging out, having a good time." Friday the 28th of March, Jimmy attends the first day of the annual Teenage Fair, renamed the Pop Expo 69 Festival, at the Palladium in Hollywood, California, and later that day, he plays on stage with Delaney and Bonnie, filling in for the group's absent guitarist. The Teenage Fair concept was started in 1962 by promoter and television producer Al Burton, who wanted to create a mini-World's Fair for teenagers. It featured department store fashion shows, automobiles, art and food booths, all geared toward the youth market of the 1960 AS. Later renamed Pop Expo, the Teenage Fair was a 10-day-long event that promised hundreds of activities of special interest to teenagers, including surfing clinics, hot rod displays, outdoor amusement rides, midway with all the carnival booths, dance contest, a car bash and cramming contest, yo-yo championship, karate exhibition, skydiving and surfing films upstairs in the balcony. The big highlight of the fair was the annual Miss Teen USA pageant and the Battle of the Bands competition. In 1969, the Pop Expo Fair attracted 288,635 paying attendees. That concludes this episode of the series. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we will begin the deep dive into April of 1969 and the Spring US Tour. Don't forget to subscribe for future content updates. And by the way, if you have any stories, anecdotes, or photographs to share, then we would love to hear from you. Until next time,